One of the questions that a person really should ask himself at some point in life is, how good is Hashem at doing that which Hashem does? Okay, how good is Hashem, how capable is Hashem at doing that which Hashem does? Now, if you're not really sure about the answer to this question, I don't know, just look at the stars, the moon, the sun, just look at basic biology textbooks, study a little bit of physics, study the complexity of this world, and you'll see that Hashem is very, very capable, and that Hashem is extraordinarily good at doing that which Hashem does. And then it's time to ask the very next question, and that is, well, if that's true, then why did Hashem create the human being, you and I, the way that Hashem created us? And if you think about the fact that Hashem is clearly very, very capable, and if you study the human condition, I think you're going to quickly see quite a number of things that make zero sense whatsoever. Hashem designed man in a manner to allow him to suffer. But it wasn't just that Hashem created the human being with the capacity to suffer. It wasn't just that Hashem created pain receptor sites. And it wasn't just that Hashem created an entire human dimension of personality that causes me grief or sadness or unhappiness. It's that clearly Hashem designed very specific conditions and very unique situations that seem to serve one purpose. Not to help man, but to make man's life on the planet quite difficult. As in things like pain and injuries, disease, illness, distress, emotional or psychological. And if you study the different types of these conditions, you really should ask a question. Let's deal with something basic. There are in the world things called diseases. Now, Hashem again is clearly quite capable, because if you study the immune system in man, you see it's phenomenally complex, brilliantly created, and yet with gaping holes in it, and specific diseases that seem to be almost handcrafted, hand-designed to penetrate those very holes, almost like there's a Swiss cheese, a hole that's so tiny right there, and a specific disease that was crafted to penetrate that very opening. And let's just focus on a couple of more obvious ones. The Black Plague. Now, the Black Plague is probably the deadliest epidemic ever known to mankind. It really hit the three different time periods, the 6th century, the 14th century, and 17th centuries. We're talking about not just millions of people, we're talking about estimates of a third of the European population just dying. We're talking within a week, meaning to say you get the disease, you have about 6 days, 7 days, 2 weeks at most, and you're dead. But we're talking entire towns, villages. We're talking, again, almost a third of the European population dying in one fell swoop. And by the way, you don't have to go that far back in history. If you look at something much more recent, we have something called the flu. Now, you and I get the flu and it's very uncomfortable, and it really is. It's 2 weeks in bed and maybe more. But in 1918, there was a worldwide pandemic, a flu epidemic that went from one part of the globe to the other. And it took quite a few people with it. The estimates are somewhere about 20 million people. In the 4 years of World War I, maybe 9 million people died. The flu in 1 year wiped out twice as much or more. And when you begin studying the various diseases that Hashem created, I think it begs asking why. There are communicable diseases, there are infectious diseases, there are bacterial diseases, there are viral diseases, there are genetic diseases, and all of them cause pain and discomfort. And all of them cause very serious side effects. But it's not just diseases, there are entire system disorders. Central nervous disorders, there's immune system disorders, autoimmune system disorders, urinary system disorders. There's an entire field of medicine. You know, we call it medicine and we call it health, but really it's an entire field dedicated to trying to alleviate the pain, the suffering that mankind goes through. And let's just study let's call it the top diseases in the USA. Heart disease is a major, major issue. The biggest killer we have in this country. Stroke is next, lung cancer, diabetes, arthritis. Now, arthritis serves no benefit whatsoever. If you have a pain in your knee and you find it very difficult to stand, if you find it very difficult to walk, it is not a pleasant situation. When I was in Rochester, there was a man who I consider one of my friends, and he was a great tzaddik. I really loved him as an individual, but he suffered. He suffered tremendously. Towards the end of his life, he had very, very severe arthritis. I remember one Yom Kippur, I helped him up 3 steps in the yeshiva. I think he suffered more pain in those 3 steps than I suffered my entire year. And that is a very, very debilitating disease. But it's not just arthritis. There's Alzheimer's. There's a cadre of ailments, physical. There are all kinds of cancers. Not just that there's one cancer. There's bone cancer, there's brain cancer, there's breast cancer, there's cervical cancer, there's colon cancer. You have entire legions of diseases, of ailments, of illnesses. And they have great, great costs. Heart diseases in the United States of America costs about 630,000 people a year die because of cancer, only about 500,000. When you start dealing with the respiratory illnesses, when you start dealing with stroke, when you start dealing with all of the rest of the issues, you see there's a plethora of physical ailments, each one unique, each one seemingly designed specifically to attack a different area of the body, cause different types of pain, suffering. And of course, there's a whole other area called psychological/emotional distress. And there are all kinds of states. There's Asperger's, there's anorexia, there's autism, there's bipolar, there's anxiety, there's ADD, there's depression. There are all types of personality disorders. And when you realize that each of them was handcrafted, each of them was specifically designed, and the human personality had to be created in a manner to allow for these issues, you begin to realize something doesn't add up. Something doesn't make sense. But I want to really bring this home with one specific point. The Chovos HaLevavos tells us that if you'd imagine the most kindly, giving human being you could ever picture. Imagine Avram Avinu, total overflowing love. Take that love, multiply it 10,000 times. You don't begin to have an inkling to the love that Hashem has for every one of His creations. Not because I did anything, and not because I'm worthy, but because Hashem is a meitiv, Hashem is the benefactor, Hashem is the giver, and Hashem wants to share of His good with the ultimate purpose in creation called man. Yet, if you look out on the planet, you don't see all that much of that shining benefit. Let's discuss something called pain. Now, pain comes in many different types. There's acute pain, and there's chronic pain. There's breakthrough pain, and then there's bone pain. There's soft tissue pain. There's referred pain. There's phantom pain. Phantom pain when a person loses a limb, and they no longer have that limb, yet they feel intense pain in that limb that's no longer there, that they no longer have, but the nervous system hasn't sort of learned that yet, and they feel intense burning or needles or extreme pain without even a cause. And not only does pain come in different sort of methods, it's stabbing, aching, or throbbing, but it comes in many, many different degrees, from minimal or barely discomfort to unpleasant to constant to unmanageable to pain so severe that literally it causes a person not to be able to function, maybe even to die. And you could really describe pain in a very, very poetic almost way. There's achy kind of pain, there's dull pain, there's raw pain, there's sharp pain, there's cutting, there's shooting, there's boring, there's throbbing, there's pounding, there's beating, there's pulsing. You could write poetry about all the different flavors and nuances of pain. So here's the question. If Hashem is the mativ, the benefactor, if Hashem loves human beings, why did Hashem create pain? And don't tell me that pain helps, because it doesn't. Avoidance pain, which teaches you to take your hand away from the hot pot, is processed in the spine. You see, when you step on that sharp nail, if it took long enough for the neural pathways to bring up that message to the thalamus and process it in the brain, the nail would be way through your foot and you'd be in big trouble. Avoidance pain that teaches you to quickly move your foot away, move your hand away, is processed in the spine. The pain that's debilitating, the pain that doesn't let you get out of bed in the morning, and the pain that is totally racking and totally consuming is processed in the brain and does man no good whatsoever. So here's the question. Why would a good, kindly creator create pain? And maybe you'll tell me, well, it's to punish the wicked. And that'd be fine and well. If only the evil people, if only the wicked people suffered, okay, I get it. But that's not quite the reality. Let me share with you a study that Lancet magazine, a prestigious medical journal, published. They found that 95% of all people on Earth, 95%, old, young, reporting having some illness or injury every year. That means every year, any given year, 95% of the population will have some type of illness or injury. But that's not the really scary part. 1/3 of adults have 5 or more significant health problems. The last year they were able to gather the information from was 2013, but those were the statistics. 1/3 of adults have 5 or more significant health problems in that year and any given year. But it gets even more frightening when you focus on the older spectrum of the population. 25% of those 80 or older reported having 10 or more significant health complaints in the given year. And nearly 2/3 of people 80 years and older have between 5 and 9. Now, when we mean significant health complications, that means really big deal stuff, from lower back pain to neck pain to migraine to depression to anxiety to schizophrenia to issues that do not allow a human being to just simply enjoy life. So if it's clear that 95% of the population have at least one issue, and different ages have far more, the question is, gee golly, why? And not just that, it's clear that Hashem designed it and made it to be that way. And the question is why? And just for the fun of it, I'd like to focus this question a little bit by really pointing out something that I consider eye-opening. When I was a kid, I spent many years, I have a martial arts background, I spent many years in karate, and I was a big fan of different people. There was one fellow whose name was George Dillman. Now, George Dillman was a very skilled karate martial artist, but George Dillman took himself very seriously, in fact, a tad too seriously. You see, he was a showman, the ultimate showman. And he would put on various demonstrations, breaking first boards, then bricks, and then huge blocks of ice. And eventually he ran out of something to top himself with. So George decided he was going to put on the ultimate karate demonstration. He was going to fight a bear. Now, you have to keep in mind the fact that obviously a human being against a bear is not going to do too well. So George hired a circus bear, a trained bear, and the trainer choreographed a fight scene with George. George was to duck, and the bear was to swing wide, and George was to hit the bear. And they choreographed the entire fight scene, and the day of the demonstration, the curtain comes up, George steps out, and the bear steps out to begin the battle. Well, as I mentioned, George took himself maybe a tad too seriously. He decided he wasn't going to go through the choreographed fight scene. He was going to actually knock the bear out. The crowd is gathered. The bear swings wide. George ducks, and George hauls off. Boom! Smashes the bear full force in the chest. Now, needless to say, George did not succeed in knocking the bear out. But he did manage to get the bear angry. So angry that had the trainer not somehow stopped the bear, George wouldn't have been there at the end of that demonstration. Because you see, a bear is 600 pounds of muscle. I don't care what rank black belt you are, you cannot fight against a bear. So here's the question. Clearly Hashem is capable of creating a bear that's mighty and strong. Why didn't Hashem put me, the same I who I'm talking to you, into a body that's powerful, mighty? Have you ever been in the winter shivering to the bone? I want you to think about the polar bear. The polar bear will cut a hole in the ice with its paw, go in for a dip in the frigid water, come up and then sun itself in the Arctic negative 40-degree temperature. The bear doesn't get cold. Why? Because the bear is mighty, the bear has a layer of blubber under its skin, and the bear is well equipped for life. Why didn't Hashem make us like that, mighty and strong, and never to get cold? When I walk by and a nail is sticking by, my skin rips open. That doesn't happen to most animals in the wild. Most animals in the wild are built rugged, are built sturdy. Why didn't Hashem make the human being that way? And while we're asking questions, let's extend this a little bit. The next time you're in the dentist's chair, I want you to think about the shark. Why the shark? Because that mighty hunter of the sea has 25 rows of teeth, so that when one of its teeth has a problem, the next one just pops it out and comes in a new tooth. Why didn't Hashem make the human being with 25 rows of teeth, so that when I have a wisdom tooth problem, pop, the next one comes in, pops it out, and we're good to go? And when you begin looking about the wild kingdom, you see many, many features that Hashem gave to all the various different animals, but didn't give it to man. And why not? Michael Zasloff, who was a biochemist with the National Institute of Health, made an interesting discovery. He found that the African clawed frog didn't get diseased. He was performing surgeries on these frogs, and he put them back into the bacteria-filled murky water, and they never got an infection. He discovered the why. The body of this African clawed frog has a certain substance that it secretes that kills every known bacteria. The African clawed frog does not get sick because it has an immune system that's impervious to bacteria. Before penicillin, one of the greatest killers of man was bacteria. And even now it causes quite a bit of havoc. Why didn't Hashem give that to the human being? Hashem is clearly capable. Hashem did this for all the various animals of the wild. Why didn't Hashem take all the different features, all the different strengths, put them together in making the pinnacle called man? The purpose of all of creation is man anyway. Why not take all the wonders, everything in the wild kingdom, make a Superman, and let man enjoy his stay on the planet? And while we're asking questions, let's ask one more. If you exercise regularly, you're familiar with the fact that there's something called runner's high. After a vigorous, intense exercise session, usually 45 minutes into it or so, after a certain while, your body begins secreting different hormones and different neurochemicals, and there's a certain sense of euphoria. It'll usually begin maybe an hour, hour and a half after the workout, and you have this sort of sense of, wow, you just feel wholesome and happy. Now, scientists study what brings this about. There's a very specific set of neurotransmitters that the body secretes during exercise. The thalamus, that part of the brain that's receptive to this, receives that message, and the sense of, washes over man. Now here's the question. Clearly Hashem is capable of creating these neurotransmitters. Clearly Hashem made the thalamus. Why didn't Hashem just give the human being a much more sensitive thalamus? Why not just create many more of these neurotransmitter cells so that the human being can be awash in pleasure all day long? Imagine I wake up in the morning, stretch, a healthy dose of those neurotransmitters pass through my body. I drink my first glass of orange juice, a new set of euphoria comes upon me. If Hashem can create it, and Hashem did create it, why not give it in greater abundance to man? And at the risk of being irreverent, I do believe that if I were given the mission of creating man, I could do a much better job than Hashem did. And excuse my being just that irreverent, but imagine a boss call comes out. Imagine a powerful voice from heaven, Shafier, I was sent from Hashem. What? I was sent to tell you, you don't like the way Hashem made man? Go ahead, you make man. Okay, so I've got my mandate. I get to choose whatever feature I want, and I get to make man. My man would be powerful like the polar bear. My man would go for weeks without needing water like the camel. My man would have super hearing like the bat. My man would have such a powerful neurotransmitter system that he'd be awash in constant joy. Oh, and another couple of things. You know, that thing called envy, not in my man, didn't do man any good. That thing called jealousy, forget it, I'd wipe that part out altogether. Anger, nah, I don't think so. I would create a Superman. And the reason why this question isn't irreverent, the reason why this question is very relevant, is because it underscores a very specific purpose. And that is that Hashem is quite capable, and yet Hashem created man exactly as Hashem created man. Incredibly dependent, incredibly weak, incredibly susceptible to diseases and pain and various situations. And the Mesillas Yesharim explains that no thinking person, no intelligent human being could ever believe that Hashem would have created the human being for his condition on this world only. Because if Hashem created us for this world and it ends in the grave, when Elsie the cow dies and her nefesh just evaporates, imagine that's the same thing happens to you and I. If that were true, then there are so many features in the human being that Hashem never would have created. But you see, the way the Mesillas Yesharim phrases it is very important to recognize. And I want to read to you the words. V'tira be'emes, you'll see in truth, shel lo yuchal shum bal seichel, no intelligent person could possibly believe that the purpose of man's creation is for his station in this world alone. Because what is man's station in this world? How many years does he live? And who is it that's really happy? Who is it who's really satisfied? A man lives 70 years, and maybe 80 years, and most of his days are pain, issues, troubles, and strife. With so many different types of suffering, so many different types of tirdas, of worries, and after all of that, death. Explains Mesillas Yesharim, the human condition screams out that Hashem had a much greater purpose. He says, don't you realize, look at your body, look at your situation, and you'll quickly see the greatest proof in the world to the fact that Hashem created you for a much bigger purpose, and it has nothing to do with this world. This world is the corridor. This is the gym. We're put here to grow and to accomplish. Many, many situations were given to us specifically to challenge us. Many situations are not for our benefit. Many situations don't help us. Here, but they sure do shape me as a person. They sure do challenge me as a human being. They sure do force me to make choices to either transcend and grow or to shrivel up, but choose I must. And when you study the human condition, what you quickly see is it's impossible for Hashem to have created a human being for a station in His world, because all of the things we see would not be there. And I'd like to share with you what I consider a very, very critical observation. If an atheist were to ask me advice, imagine our local atheist were to ask me for advice, I would tell him one thing. I would say, sir, if you'd listen to me, I would suggest to you that you climb to a very high building and immediately jump off. I highly recommend that you end your life now. Why? Because let's face it, guy, your life makes no sense. You're going to suffer pain, poverty, illness, disease, issues, troubles. Why go through it? How much pleasure do you really have? How much fun really is life? Okay, I know that life has moments and life is beautiful, but at the end of the day, if you hit the grave and it's over and there is no purpose, what are you living for? And what are you going through all this trouble and issues and worries for? Most of your time on the planet is not going to be spent in pleasures upon pleasures. Most of your time on the planet is going to be working and dealing in troubles and issues, and interspersed in that will be good times. But the vast majority of your life isn't that way. Now, if you understand that there's a much greater purpose, if you understand that this is the gym, and you understand you're here to grow and accomplish, and you understand that every single situation in life really isn't relevant, they're but the stage settings to allow me to become the great human being I could become, then life fundamentally makes sense. Certainly life is worth leading, and I make sense of my existence. But if you do not understand that there's a world to come, then my suggestion to you is jump, end it. There's no point anyway. And the only reason why our local atheist doesn't jump is because he's not really thinking, he's not really challenging himself, and he's not really being critically, intellectually honest. And I love it when they get philosophical. Oh, I'm doing it for the children, for the next generation. I work very hard. I make that money, I spend that money, I make that money, I spend the money. It's true there's very little purpose to my existence, but I'm leaving a legacy to the next generation so that they can work real hard, make some money, spend the money, make that money, spend the money, then they can die. So that they can leave it to their children so they can work, spend the money, make the money, spend the money, then they die. It's purposeless, it's folly, it's foolish. Find a roof and jump. And again, the only reason why our local atheist doesn't jump is because he's not really thinking. Because Mesillas Yesharim is telling us that any thinking person will immediately recognize life makes zero sense. If the corridor which I'm in now is the end-all and be-all, jump because it doesn't really benefit you. What are you living for? What's the point of it? Suffering and pain and issues and trouble, and what do you gain from it? Zero, nothing. And when you're done, you're dead. So why go through it? And this point is not just a philosophical point. It underscores everything that you're ever going to go through. Do you know what the most painful thing in life is? To suffer when there's no purpose. To suffer and go through things that have no rationale, no reason. And if you don't understand that there's a world to come, you're going to suffer needlessly. You're going to suffer pains and troubles and issues. And it's every imaginable disease and every imaginable pain and every imaginable trouble because we all have stuff. And if there's no world to come, my goodness, it's meaningless, empty, purposeless. And I think the point that the Mesillas Yesharim is saying to us is very, very clear. Sometimes it's hard to relate to the world to come. Maybe I don't see it so clearly. Look at your life. Look at your existence. It screams out the world to come. and if I recognize that Hashem is loving and kindly, and I recognize that I'm in pain, oh my goodness, clearly it's worth it. More than I love me, Hashem loves me. More than I feel my pain, Hashem feels my pain, and yet I have to go through this. Oh my goodness, what it must be worth. What's awaiting me. And this world, if you understand it, if you focus, is the greatest Mussar lesson in the world to prove the world to come. It's the greatest demonstration of the value of the world to come. Because if Hashem is the most kindly, loving, giving benefactor, and there is so many diseases and illnesses and pains and issues, know and understand there is a grand purpose, a much, much bigger purpose, lofty and way, way above anything in this world. And when you understand this, life itself fundamentally makes sense. And if you don't, nothing makes sense whatsoever. Focusing, thinking, putting the brain on is something that we human beings don't do. A person can spend his entire life never dealing with this issue. Why did Hashem make me the way Hashem made me? Why are there pain receptors? Why is my skin sensitive? Why do I get sunburns and headaches and stomach aches and cramp? Who needs this? And explains Mesillas Yesharim, you need it. You may not understand the exact answers. You may not understand exactly why now. But the more you focus on it, the more you'll see that Hashem didn't create us for this world. This is the passageway. This is the hallway. We go through it quickly and we're done. And then forever, for eternity, I am what I shape myself into. When you understand this, fundamentally, life makes sense. When you understand this, you wake up in the morning with a sense of zeal, with energy. Let's go. Even though I know that there are going to be troubles, even though I know that there are going to be issues and problems, it doesn't matter. It's more than just worth it. Life fundamentally is precious, is beautiful. But more than anything, Mesillas Yesharim is explaining to us, when you study the human condition, you see the world to come clearly in front of you. But you have to put the brain on, you have to think. When you do that, you see the majesty, the beauty of Hashem's world. You understand, maybe not with total clarity, but you understand the general picture, and you have the greatest proof to the fact that Hashem created us for a much greater purpose, not for this world, but for our purpose in the world to come.